model of supported employment pilot projects for the last several years. And some of the people involved in this are, as you see, DHS, Folk Rehab, 43 North Iowa, Hope Haven, and then we have a number of our mental health and IHH partners with us today, and also the region's CEOs, Russell Wood and Shane Walter. So I think in the chat pod early on, I listed the panel participants. We're going to go through, we have a lot of questions for people today. And then we're also going to provide opportunities as we go along for audience members to ask questions in the chat pod. And then we'll be addressing those questions periodically as we go. Next slide, Jess. So, some of us may ask, why do we focus on employment? So I just wanted to say one of the backgrounds or one of the essential tenets of IPS is that employment is an essential part of recovery, and it's a central clinical concern. It's work as a way to approach other goals, combating boredom, finding structure. It's cost effective. And of course, most people want to work, and it's the most normalizing role that we all have in our lives. Of course, what's the first thing people ask when they meet you is, what do you do? Even when you're retired, people want to know what you do with your day. So this is a typical role for adults in our society. Next slide. So about IPS, I'm going to mostly let the panel participants talk about this, but what is IPS? This is a supported employment model that helps people who are living with behavioral health conditions to work at regular jobs of their choosing. There are, of course, many variations of supported employment. IPS is the only evidence-based practice of supported employment, however. And we are going to go ahead and get into our first question. And this is for our VR partners and our providers. What makes IPS distinct from the traditional way that you would provide services and supports to individuals? Panelists, please raise your hand, and then Tammy will call on you to answer the question.
Oh, how about Sue Faber?
Okay, I'm Sue Faber. I'm from the Mason City Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and I serve the adults in Franklin County. And our IPS group is composed of 43 North Iowa, Robin McKee from Franklin County Case Management, Michelle Prawley from IHH Prairie Ridge, and then Ken Zimmerman. And prior to COVID, we were meeting regularly every Monday afternoon from 1 to 2 to review new referrals and discuss progress of existing people. And since COVID, we've been meeting via Zoom. Vocational rehabilitation traditionally takes 60 days to an eligibility and 90 days to a plan, but with IPS, as soon as we get a referral with the diagnosis, I go ahead and schedule an intake and do the eligibility and the plan all within a week, because I have the information that I need so that they are able to get rapidly into the system and start participating in those services. Also, in my absence this summer, they did have us roll out all of our authorizations with an exception up front. If the person's over 24, then IHH has been authorizing.
All right.
Okay. I have hands raised from Kelly Kratz.
Hi, I'm Kelly with 43 North Iowa, and we work on one of the teams with Sue Faber. One of the things that really makes it distinct is that it is rapid engagement, which Sue identified. Also, it's no exclusion, so there's no assessment services that you need to do prior to getting into the services. And it's also meaning no no exclusions. If you're unable to pass a drug test, we will still keep working with you. We'll just move on to an employer that may potentially not do a drug test at that point in time. And the other thing that's really different about it is the mental health treatment team that meets on a weekly basis.
Other respondents, Tammy?
I muted myself. I'm sorry. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Phipps, and I am the supervisor of our IPS pilots up in the northwest corner of Iowa. And yeah, Sue and Kelly said most of it already, or a lot of it already, but I think another thing that makes IPS distinct from other supported employment services is the systematic job development, and how, since IPS is a evidence-based practice, your process is laid out. You know, there's lots of tools that you can use to keep you organized. And I think that's something that's definitely distinct, and that all of our employment specialists are continually working on those relationships and building those relationships with employers. So when we get referrals, we're ready to hit the ground running and hopefully have some ideas for individuals to look for jobs already. And we really take them where they're at and honor their wishes and look for jobs that they want to find.
Thank you. I have Vienna waving at me. So Vienna.
Thank you, Tammy. So I just wanted to, and this was kind of touched upon by the other three ladies already, but I just wanted to really express the key difference for me is the partnership that is required among the parties involved, the IHHs, the MHs, and the CRPs and VR. You know, with other support employment programs, the partnership is really encouraged, but it's not specifically and explicitly mandated as it is in IPS. And that is a key component for me, whether, you know, we do whatever types of payments or whatever types of processes, that partnership that really requires that level of communication is a key difference for me.
Thank you. Lori, you had your hand up a while ago, and I was just getting to you, but if you have something more to add?
I had my hand up, and then as other people talked, they kind of already said what I wanted to say. But I think for me, one of the really key differences, and Kelly kind of talked about this, you know, in traditional supported employment, a lot of times we do start with the assessments like discovery, and we might do a work readiness and those types of things. And with IPS, you don't do those, and you just roll right into that job development and kind of viewing, I guess, you know, work and that process in and of itself, you know, is almost kind of like the assessment. So really kind of learning as you go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any more hands, Lind. I think we're ready for the next question.
All right, we'll go to question 2. And this is for any or all of our panelists. What do you especially like about IPS?
We have
Don't be shy.
Cassandra.
Hi, Cassandra. I'm one of the supervisors of the Integrated Health Home at Prairie Ridge in Mason City. So we are involved with the IPS in Franklin County. One of the things that myself and the care coordinator involved, like Kelly had mentioned, and the no exclusion. So we have individuals who recognize that they're still actively using substances, and that's a huge barrier for them to obtain employment, which kind of just propels the cycle for them with not, you know, engaging in services or feeling like they have a daily, you know, one of our focuses in IHH is meaningful daily activities, and they kind of lack in that area. So we really, really like how that's not a barrier in this program, and we're able to help individuals and kind of not single them out like, oh, well, we can't really do too much for you right now. Let us know when you would be able to, you know, pass a test. And that's been really great for us.
Thank you. And Ethan Price, you're next on my hand raising list here.
Thank you. My name is Ethan Price. I am a team lead for Integrated Health Services here in the northwestern corner of the state, working with Hope Haven with IPS. I would say, you know, the thing, I mean, obviously what they've kind of already mentioned for the first couple of questions, I mean, that's all positive things that I really, really like about IPS. But I also think that one of the biggest benefits of IPS compared to other vocational services is the three-legged stool approach, which is that, you know, you have the mental health component, you have the employment specialist, and you have like the IHH, IVRS, case manager, a whole team of professionals working together on behalf of the member and for the member. So we have staffings, you know, each month so we all kind of get together and communicate. So we're able to eliminate really any hiccups that might typically come up in the process. And it allows the member to really quickly obtain their goal of employment while also maintaining their mental health. Everyone is kind of aware of what's going on. There are no surprises that could derail the process. And really, I mean, the ultimate line is that the member achieves their goal quicker.
Thank you. How about Brianna?
I'm assuming you meant me. I'm Brenna,
Yes.
the Director of Substance Abuse Services for Plains Area Mental Health, and I work very closely with Ethan. And so I think it's good that we were back to back. I'm just going to hitchhike off of what Ethan was sharing. But from maybe a little different viewpoint than that of an case manager, as a psychotherapist that I'm working with clients in the IPS program. What I have found is that when we're doing their functional assessments for treatment planning, maybe have some concerns in the area of employment or productivity or volunteering and those types of things. We work very closely with Ethan and his team to get referred into IPS. I would say that the IHH probably does the majority of our referrals for IPS because a lot of times we're passing them off to Ethan saying, hey, get them going in IPS as well. So that team approach within our own organization. But what I've noticed with my clients that I've had in the IPS program is just an overall confidence that they begin to present themselves. Work makes us feel good. Work makes us feel valued. And when those clients have that opportunity, when maybe doors have been shut many times, and they feel that they have the support now from the employment specialist to go into maybe a workplace that maybe was a little bit scary or a little bit anxiety driven for them, it really helps build their self-esteem and their confidence.
Thank you. We have a hand raise from Russell Wood. Oh, you took your hand down.
That's because I knew you were going to call on me next, Tammy. And
okay.
I'm like that. So I just wanted to say that what I like about IPS is it's really about the individual. I think that traditional supported employment is about a process. And even though IPS is done to fidelity, it really is about the individual. As was brought up before, you look at the person and the intent is to get them a job. And I really like that. We've seen effectiveness and outcomes with IPS that we have not seen with standard supported employment or traditional supported employment. And so as we as regions look at funding things, and I know Shane would echo this, we're really put in a position where we have to look at our return on investment. And when I pay for vocational services for an individual, then the intent is that person will get a job. And IPS has been very good at being able to deliver on that.
Perfect. Thank you. I have no more hands raised and I see no one waving at me. So if you want to answer this, that's great. If not, I just want to remind people there is a chat function too that we're kind of monitoring for questions. So if you have something to put there, any of the persons attending. So thank you. So next question.
We'll go to question 3 then. And this is for our providers, our mental health, IHH, behavioral health people, and voc rehab. Do you find any differences in outcomes for individuals in IPS versus traditional service delivery? And Russell kind of hinted at this, but if others want to talk about that some more, or maybe give us some examples, that would be great.
Don't everybody speak at once. Oh, Cassandra now.
I think, obviously the IPS program is a little quicker pace because we don't have to wait as long for funding. And so we can get working with them a little quicker. So I think the outcomes are quicker. We've had great success with getting people community employment in a timely fashion. So I think just the focus being on what the client needs are, what their abilities are, and then really focusing in on what the team can do to help them get a job where they'll be successful.
Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, well, and our overall stats, I guess, for the first year or 18 months, I guess, of we had 71% employment rate, which we were pretty happy with. We have pretty good success with our regular supported employment, but what I appreciate, I guess, a lot about IPS is the fact that all experience that you have in work is viewed as beneficial. So even if one job doesn't work out, you right away get started working with the person. What did we learn? What can we do differently next time? Maybe what different supports do we need to put in place? And you hit the ground running again. I feel like sometimes in our regular supported employment programs, that one didn't work out. So you're obviously not ready to work. So we're going to wait to start again. And we don't do that in IPS. You just start going and learn from what you did and move on to the next opportunity.
Thank you. Ethan. Oh.
Yep. So, in my experience with over the last 6 years, when working with other vocational services, it typically takes, months, sometimes several months for a member to actually obtain a job. With IPS, this typically is to, a month, sometimes even less than that, unless there are no other circumstances that might cause a delay. But also in addition to that, rapid engagement and getting someone a job really quickly, with the three-legged stool approach, each part of the team is aware of any mental health concerns or other concerns or barriers that might come up. So each part really works together with the member on these barriers. And in our experience, this has led to our members being happier and actually having fewer active symptoms and crisis calls to our staff. I don't have any physical data to prove this. I do apologize about that. And I've spoken with our staff, and across the board, this really is what we're seeing is our members with RPS are happier, showing less symptoms, and they're calling us with crisis calls a lot less.
Thank you. Kara, I saw you waving at me a minute ago.
Yep. So similarly to, what Rachel had mentioned with the rapid engagement piece and the turnover piece, learning from what jobs maybe didn't work out. I think on the VR side, something that I've noticed up in the Northwest Iowa corner, where a job doesn't necessarily work out, there is kind of a gap sometimes in maybe a job candidate learning what didn't maybe go the best and making that next job be something different. So I think, on the VR side, we're seeing that somebody can get a job really quickly and they're supported, but if that job doesn't work out, that there's maybe a gap in, just taking a little bit of time to assess, what could have been done differently. And so that's just something that we see up in our area, is just a little bit of a gap with making sure that it's the right fit. And that's all a part of the process too.
Thank you. Kelly.
Yeah, I was just as well going to reiterate what Rachel said. I just think, some of the differences is just that rapid engagement. So when people want to work, they want to work. They don't want to go through an assessment or let's do some shadows and all of those pre-assessment services. And so I think that leads to sometimes better outcomes because we are rapidly trying to work with them and finding employment. So when they come to an intake, they really want a job, and that's what we're focused on versus trying to do all these other things prior to that. And then as well as if the job doesn't work out, then we go right back to that mental health treatment team to try to figure out what things we learned as well as the client learned, and then start looking for other employment. So using that mental health treatment team really does help find solutions for success for them.
Great. I don't see any more hands raised. Going once. Okay.
All right, and then I think our next slide is check whether we have some questions from participants in the chat pod. And I don't believe I can see the chat pod, so I
Don't see any.
I don't see any questions right now, Lynn. If anybody has any comments or questions, feel free to type them in right now, or we'll just move forward.
All right, yeah, please use your chat pod to put your comments or questions.
We have a question, Lynn. How is IPS being paid for in Iowa?
Very good question. Who would like to address that? How about Shane and Russell?
I can start, or you go ahead, Shane.
Well, I was just going to say, right now it's entirely upon the regions to fund the program. We're working on getting the MCOs involved, of course, but at this point in time, the regions through pilot programs have funded it to this point. Russell, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I do. We've kind of done what's deficit funding. So I know that that Voc Rehab and the MCOs have put some money towards it, and I believe that they're looking at changing the way it's funding. But because of the rapid engagement approach, the way that traditional supported employment is funded, technically providers get more money if they take longer to do something. So because of this model and the success of this model, it's hard to get funding that sustains you. So for the first 2 years in our region, we block granted, but we deficit funded. So basically what that meant is we guaranteed their budget. And I think Shane, you and Kim did the same up in Northwest Iowa. We did not do that this fiscal year. We did let the providers know that we weren't able to do that again this fiscal year. I'm not sure, Shane, if you guys are continuing to do it.
I can't unmute here. I guess I am. Yeah, we're continuing to fund it through this fiscal year. I think at pretty close to the levels that we've been funding it for the first two.
Let's pop on as well. I'm Melissa Lear. I'm the CEO of Northwest Iowa Care Connections, and we're funding it as well.
Way to make me look bad, both of you. Thank you very much.
Happy to help, Russell, anytime.
Lynn?
Thank you, Melissa, for jumping in there. Okay, I just would add a comment that we have had a work group basically supported by the U.S. Department of Labor that's been operating somewhat in this fiscal year with a wide array of partners. And early on in that process, Voc Rehab and Iowa Medicaid Enterprise, Leanne Moskowitz and Vienna and Steve, worked very hard to identify a model that will work for funding the services to the individual portion of IPS. And we can probably talk more about that in a later segment. But basically that will probably be starting at least on the IME side, that'll be starting in January. And what it does is it operates off of milestones or outcome payments. So it is a little bit more of a fit with the IPS model and provides a bit better reimbursement for those. I don't know about better, but reimbursement in chunks versus hourly or quarter hours, which is more advantageous under this model. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Any other questions in the chat pod?
Nothing else right now.
All right, we will move on to our question 4 for our panelists. Was it 4 or 5? 4. We want to go back 1. Okay, what are the barriers or the disincentives to mental health providers and IHHs in supporting IPS? specifically for those partners that are on the panel?
I see no hands. Oh, there's Cassandra.
I'm like I said, we love the IPS program and we think it works really well. I think in the beginning, and then going forward, if we extend this into other counties, it's just the time finding, an IHH care coordinator to dedicate a time every week for that meeting, which worked well in Franklin County. We're able to figure that out, and that's just was one of the things that we would have to figure out moving forward. But if we can do that, it definitely works very well. So we're hopeful.
Brianna.
I was going to kind of echo that, echo kind of what Cassandra said. The meetings are very important. Meeting with the employment specialists, kind of keeping us all on the same page and being in the room together and talking about, I think there's a lot of power and they're really important to have those meetings. But time, like all of us say over and over again, but time is really an issue, especially when we want to pull in my mental health staff. We, like everybody else, we work on productivity expectations, and to take time out weekly for meeting has been a lot of resistance I've gotten from therapists, feeling like they really are better served using that time to see an individual client than attending a meeting with an employment specialist. However, I know they do find value in them because I get a lot of good feedback after we have those meetings. But I will also say in my area right now, to be very honest, I don't know if we've really been meeting weekly. It's been very difficult to coordinate schedules to be able to make that happen. However, I do know, we are constantly in contact with our employment specialists by email, via phone calls. We have our cell phones. So we're doing a lot of that, but it is very difficult just time-wise to get us all in the same room, especially after COVID hit. We were doing really good and then COVID kind of hit, and it kind of jarred all of us, I think.
Ethan. You're still muted, Ethan.
Got it. I'm not going to add a whole lot to what Cassandra and Brenna kind of just said, but I'm going to kind of reiterate what they kind of mentioned. There is that difficulty of finding the staffings and such. Weekly meetings when you're already very busy can be difficult. However, we have found ways around that, and we do communicate very well. We partner very well with Hope Haven, the IPS provider over here in Northwestern Iowa. We have a very good working relationship, and we do communicate well with them. And we have been able to, there's a lot of different, hands in the pot, so to speak. There's a lot of different people that we need to bring to the table between all the different partners, IVR, etc. But we have been able to find times to make that work. And overall, the benefits of overcoming these and these some of these issues far outweighs, everything else. The results for our members that we've been seeing is worth the difficulties that we have administratively trying to find time and all those things. So it is kind of a barrier, but it's one that we overcome, sometimes not so easily, but we overcome it, and it works out for the better for our members.
Thank you. Any other IHHs or mental health providers that chime in there? Okay.
All right, let's go to question 5 then. Thank you. Okay, and this is for our voc rehab, our CEOs, and again, our mental health, behavioral health folks. Similar for the mental health folks, to the last question, but what challenges have you faced in implementing IPS?
Brianna. Oh, are you still hand raised from before?
I must be. I didn't think I had an unhand raise myself.
Okay, sorry. Russell.
Oh, yeah.
Russell.
So I think one of the things that has been a challenge, we have put the IPS in 3 of our counties in our region. We're a larger region spread out geographically, and in our county, everybody's in the same building. We have a community resource center, so we have Sue here, we have Robin here, we have Ken here, we have Michelle here, so everybody's here. And before COVID, that was really nice because we all knew everybody. You'd walk down the hall, you'd say, I've got this going on. We haven't been able to do that in the other 2 counties, and I have seen a definite advantage in this county, the effectiveness of the program and the way that people can collaborate. And I think that as part of the model, I think Ethan keeps coming back to that 3-legged stool thing. As part of the model, you really have that integration of individuals. And it would be so much easier if you could do that all in one building and everybody share one office, but that isn't always an option. And in Iowa, being spread out the way we are, it is sometimes a little more difficult.
Thank you. Lori.
Sure. I think just some of the challenges from the VR side of things, you know, kind of stems a little bit from the process. And, you know, we were trying to fit this new model of IPS into our existing, you know, our existing services, our existing funding source. And as some said, that, you know, that maybe didn't work out so well. And I know you're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I think it was really just trying to, even, you know, for myself, just shift my mindset away from what we've always done to being open really to trying something new. And kind of getting the buy-in from, you know, voc rehab staff on the need to do rapid engagement. So I know Sue Faber does a really great job of, you know, getting our intake done, getting the eligibility done, getting that plan done, you know, very quickly. You know, but that in and of itself sometimes does pose some challenges and things that internally with voc rehab we had to work through.
Thank you. And I have Ethan's hand raised again. Is that new? Is that for this question? Okay, go ahead.
So the challenges that we've kind of experienced are going to be similar to my last answer. I really think that, you know, there are a lot of different people at the table when it comes to IPS. You know, that comes along with that. You know, that model is really working well for our members, but it does create challenges because there are so many people and you have to coordinate schedules and everything. Everyone is very busy and all of that. So they're having some challenges, you know, setting up those times, getting everyone to be able to come to the same meeting and work through them. It really is, though, about just having, you know, we've been able to overcome that for the most. We're continuing to work through it. You know, we're now working to create a better relationship with IVRS in addition to, you know, the other providers to make sure that we are giving the better care for our members. But that really has been the biggest challenge, I think, so far, is just making sure everyone has the time to come to the same table because there are so many people invited to the table.
Okay, there's no more hands raised, but how about our CEOs? Oh, Sue is waving at me, sorry. Sue Faber.
I just want to say I've had excellent support from everyone in Franklin County, Robin McKee, Russ Wood, you know, Michelle Prawley, Hope Foley, and Ken Zimmerman. And I think that's made, you know, a big difference in me being able to process things so quickly. And I apologize that you did see my Shih Tzu walk across the screen. He can read and he thought it was individual puppy services.
Oh, good deal. Oh dear, we can all relate to, we're dog lovers in this room, I think, a lot of us anyway. How about Shane? Do you have any comments on that question?
Yeah, I guess a couple of challenges. The obvious challenge is ongoing funding. You know, we want this program to sustain itself and shouldn't have to rely on 100% regional dollars forever. Now, I realize we're getting some dollars in that mix, and I understand that will be changing or should be changing. The work group has been working on that diligently over the last few months, and I anticipate that we'll see some new dollars in the system. One of the challenges, though, beyond that is that of maintaining staff. And what I've noticed is that when we lose a staff person, we also lose some continuity and the relationships that are being established between staff, counselors, and whomever. When we lose that staff person, that we have to rebuild those relationships, and that does take time. And so, as in any business, that's one of the biggest challenges is maintaining that staff, making certain that you have the right people doing the job. And I'm fairly pleased that that's not doesn't happen a lot. So that's a good thing. But a challenge.
Thank you. Anyone else for that question? Heard from VR, mental health, and CEOs. Oh, Steve.
I would say one more.
Oh, okay. Let me go with Steve Faulkner here first. He's waving his hand at me. Steve, your sound is really, I don't know what.
That Minnie Mouse, Mickey Mouse sound again. You might have to log back in.
Steve will be back, I think.
I was going to add, Tammy, as long as we're waiting for Steve.
Russell. Yep. Okay, Russ.
I was just going to add that one of the things that we found is that it's hard. I would like other CEOs to be invested and involved. I think that the three of us that did decide to do this, we looked at the model. It was successful in other areas internationally, and so we wanted to bring it to Iowa. And it is difficult to get other people involved, and it is because we have a lot of priorities that are given to us every year by the legislature, and things like this don't necessarily measure as high as complex needs or crisis services, et cetera. But we do understand that it is part of the social determinants of health. Having a job helps you have a place to live. It helps you have stability in your life. And it is very much healthy and good for somebody's mental health. And so we did see the investment. If we could get it to have ongoing funding, like Shane said, and sustainable, then I think we'd see it expand all across Iowa.
Thank you. I'll watch for Steve Faulkner to get back in here and try to grab him then, because I'm sure that he'll have something to add from the VR perspective. But there's no more hands raised, Lynn, for that.
Okay, very good. So next we have another opportunity to look at the chat pod to see if there's anything new in there from our audience.
We do have some questions. Sandra has two questions. The first is, has anyone completed the fidelity review with IPS? And then the second part of her question is, have any of the participants used the IPS model to work with the DD population? And then there will be an additional question after this from another participant.
Very good. So I'm going to let Rachel and Kelly respond to this first question. If you could.
Oh, sure. We both had IPS fidelity reviews done in the first year, about a year after for each of us after we began the pilots. So they typically want to do a fidelity review after there's a certain amount of time of actually providing the service. So happy to say that we have two pilots here in Northwest Iowa, and Kelly has one over in 43 North Iowa, and we all rated in the good category for our first fidelity review. We were scheduled to have another one, and then COVID happened. So the IPS works is not at this time until they're able to get to come and view the services in person and have services to be being provided normally. They're not suspending doing reviews until they can review the service actually being provided. So it's kind of on hold until things go back to normal with COVID. So
Kelly?
Yeah, just to iterate with Rachel. Yeah, we had a fidelity review as well, rated in the good category. It is 2 surveyors coming on site, and they're doing just like maybe you would have done like a CARF accreditation or some other accreditation for your other services. They're going through your case files. They're meeting with clients and guardians and employers. So essentially that's the fidelity review. And there's a lot more tracking of the information that's different than rather regular services. I don't know if Rachel would agree to that. There's a lot more tracking because, you know, to meet fidelity, you have to meet with an employer within 30 days. You have to meet face to face with a client within 5 days. Some of those, there's a lot more data points or points that you have to track to meet fidelity as well, which is different in typical supported employment services.
Thanks, Kelly. Lynn, your hand is up, and we also have Steve joined us back. So go ahead, Lynn.
Well, I'll just address the DD portion of that question where you asked if this has been used with a DD population. And to my knowledge, there has been one bit of research out of Illinois with their BIP program. They did IPS with DD and they had good outcomes. In Iowa, Goodwill of Iowa City, Amy Winslow, has done a very small pilot with some funding from the DD Council. And I haven't talked to her recently, so I don't know what exactly they have seen from it or what they've been able to do. So yeah, it's an interesting question to follow along. I will just express my personal opinion that if we're gonna do it with a population different than what it was created, you need to pay attention to some things like you would have different team members. Obviously, with a person with a developmental disability, you would want to involve their medical personnel or other types of daily living supports that they have and who would be important on that person's team. So you'd have to do a little bit of mental gyrations to get there. And then the other thing is, I'm not sure if a fidelity scale has been developed for use with that population, or what Westat, who is the IPS experts, the creators of it, what they've done about using IPS with other populations. There is research around the world of different locations that have done IPS with various populations. There's not a huge body of research about it with DD yet.
Okay, Lynn, we have a couple other questions and comments, but just to get at what you were just talking about, Sandra shared that that was their Goodwill that completed the DD pilot in a rural county. We did not get to do the fidelity review due to COVID. Thank you for sharing that, Sandra. We have a question, and I know our work group has asked about this as well. Are there guidelines or some type of provider handbook of requirements to become an IPS provider in Iowa?
Lynn, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Okay. There is not an Iowa specific guidebook yet. What there is there is a workbook or a book from Westat on IPS implementation that I'm sure our providers could talk more about. There's a 25-point fidelity scale, and there are a lot of documents in the Westat library, which is their website is ipsworks.org. So there are a lot of documents in the library about implementation. We'll have a segment later on in this panel discussion specifically for the state partners, and we can talk about the problems or the issues that we're working through right now to devise an implementation plan for Iowa, and to try and ascertain where we might be able to come up with or cobble together some adequate funding, because it's not just the service costs to stand up an IPS team or an IPS location. You also have implementation costs. You have team training, team development. There's specific technical assistance and professional training that's required. And then, of course, there are requirements of who can do a fidelity review and how that has to be done. And all those things cost money, of course. So hopefully we'll have time to get into that a little bit more later. And if we don't, I would just reassure the people that are on this webinar that we will address all the questions that are in the chat. If we run out of time, we'll put together a document that addresses them and send that out to everybody that's registered. Did we want to go back to Steve Faulkner now that he's connected?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Steve. That's what I was just going to say, Lynn. Let's go back to Steve.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Do I still sound like Mickey Mouse?
No, you're good.
Nice. You know, I spent the first half hour of our meeting not realizing that my video wasn't on. And then when I finally did get it on, I couldn't talk. I mean, that you really run a risk when you hand Zoom over to a blind guy, I got to tell you. But all I want to do here, I mean, you're 15 miles down the road from where I started, but I wanted to say that I'm very, very impressed with the IPS program as an administrator at IVRS. One of the biggest challenges we've had, and I think Lori brought it up before, is not only convincing our staff, but it's convincing our administrators and even our financial section. There's just whole levels of, I don't know, processes that are shrouded in antiquity. And we had a hard time breaking out of that. But I'll tell you what, the thing that I like the best about this is the no exclusion concept of this, and the thought that, and kind of like in the discovery process, nobody fails. This really fits in with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. And I got to tell you, it's actually impacting the way IVRS approaches all of our casework right now. So even though we don't have fidelity models for rapid placement for all of our different populations that we work with, we definitely are taking seriously this idea that everybody can work with the right supports. And we're looking for ways to make that real in all of the service provision that we do. So we're very much invested in this process, and I'm just really, really excited.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I wanted to say, can somebody put in the chat box the link to the IPS Learning Center, or the one that Lynn was trying to talk about that has some of the guidance for us?
Yeah, I'll do that, Tammy.
Okay. I think that would be best, and we can have that documented for people to write down. Okay. So we have Kelly Kratz. I don't know if your hand is raised as an artifact or if it's newly raised.
Nope, I raised it last question.
Okay. So, and you already answered that, so okay. So chat pod questions.
The only other, thanks Alicia for sharing the ipsworks.org site in the chat box. The only other comment, which might be addressed a little bit later in this presentation when the state level partners share a little information, was Denise Jewell wanted to see if we'd be sharing information on the exception to policy model that began on July 1st. So I will let you address that, Lynn.
Yeah, so the pilot providers that are currently in place, that are existing with the funding from the regions, we're facing some financial difficulty with continuing IPS as of July 1st. And so IME put into place an exception to policy for them to be able to continue the IPS model with services funding with the model of services funding that we anticipate will become routine for IPS as of hopefully January 1st. And it will be in the habilitation program. And Leanne or I will speak more fully about that later on. I'm not sure if that answers the question or the comment.
And I think IVRS, Vienna. The IVRS also did go ahead, Vienna.
Yeah, Vienna's not able to, IVRS.
She's on.
Okay, good.
I'm so sorry. What am I answering, Tammy?
The exception to policy provisions that we started for July 1st for the IPS pilots?
Oh, yes. That is primarily related to how we are authorizing the milestone payment format, right? Because typically Voc Rehab does the fee-for-service hourly payment. And because of the way that IPS is conducted, the milestone payment format didn't fit into our RSA process. And so we had to create an exception to policy to enable the financial regulating system that we utilize to authorize upfront number of hours to enable the CRPs to begin working immediately, and not knowing how quickly they're going to get somebody a job to getting them to a place of stabilization and so forth. We figured, we'll authorize it all up front and then work in terms of how we then reauthorize if all of the hours were not used and so forth. So for example, if we're collaborating with somebody who is also getting supports through an MCO, we would work with them to see when the MCO takes over, and then with the support employment payment, but we continue supporting the team in the whole process until the person is successfully employed. Does that answer?
It does, Vienna. And I don't know what I'm doing here, but I just want to say that it's a really advantage in Iowa where we have a really good relationship between our Medicaid services and our VR services, because we were able to coordinate that and provide a sort of a seamless interface between those two services. And I hope all of us in Iowa are appreciative of that relationship, because in some other places that's more challenging than we seem to have it. And also our collaborations with our regions and mental health providers have really worked out well for these pilots. So, okay. Kelly, now your hand is still raised, Kelly, so I'm not sure.
Same place where you raise hand, I just discovered you can do a lower hand. I think we'll move on to question number 6, which is for our region CEOs, Shane and Russell, that are on the panel. Describe your experience with IPS and how it's been responsive to the region's needs. You've done some of this already, but if there's more that you want to talk about, this is your chance.
Shane.
Yeah, I can start with that. I know Russell will have quite a bit to add, because I've never known Russell not to have quite a bit to add. So,
no comment.
Our experience with IPS has been profound, I would say, in that we've had the privilege and the advantage of working with Hope Haven for many, many years. And they've done an outstanding job working with individuals with disabilities, placing those individuals in the community. But by and large, those are individuals with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities. When we closed the work activity centers down, we granted Hope Haven quite a bit of money to place those individuals in the community, and they did an incredible job. I mean, we're talking nearly a couple hundred people that were placed in employment settings in the community. So it was a very gratifying experience. However, we had issues with placing folks with mental illness in the community for obvious reasons. They didn't have the supports that they needed. It was a real challenge. So when the IPS model was proposed to us by Scott Whitty and other staff, we were intrigued by that. We had visited a program in Minnesota where they had quite a bit of success, and we believed that it merited some investment in that. And I'm happy to say that 3 years later, it's met all of my expectations.
Great. Russell?
Well, I think that one of the advantages that Shane and Kim and now Melissa have up in Northwest Iowa is they have a smaller number of players at the table. So one of the things that we struggled with right off the bat is that even though we were using 43 North Iowa, they had to collaborate with a different mental health provider in each of our 3 counties, a different VR area in each of our 3 counties. And so it really made it quite a challenge. But I just want to say that Shane had mentioned earlier about a change in staff. We did have somebody that started out, and I think it might have been 6 months in that we had a change in staff, but Hope has been here since then. And Sherry and Kelly and Hope have been very good to work with, and they've reached out and went the extra mile to try to get stuff done. And I don't work with the folks in Hamilton and Hardin as much as I do in Franklin, just because I'm physically located here. And this is not meant as derogatory to anybody at all, but Sue Faber has to be probably the best VR employee in the state of Iowa. So I just want you all to know that as the rest of you VR people are sitting there. It's nothing against you. It's just, have you met Sue? And she's just been very willing to work with us too, and very willing to get people engaged. And I think that's what I've seen is the responsiveness. Quite frankly, I've got a job. And I have a job whether I do this or not, but the people that have been involved in this have really taken it upon themselves to help other people get jobs. And that's how it's been responsive to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
You owe me $1 now, Sue.
I was going to say.
I was going to say, I didn't pay, excuse me, I didn't pay him to say that.
You know what? I just signed her performance evaluation today. I'm going to have to go back and rescore it now.
Melissa, you're on the line. Do you have any comments to add to that as the regional CEO person?
Hi, thank you. I will just say, so I actually just started my term as a CEO here July 1st. So it was pretty much developed before I came in. So I don't have a lot because I'm still learning about it as well. What I will say though is I'll just echo what everyone else is saying. So that's probably not worth a whole bunch because you've heard it, but I do appreciate really working with Hope Haven. They've been nothing but wonderful, been really impressed about the model and things like that. That's a new model that since I came in as a CEO, it's different because I stepped out of the mental health disability service world for about 6 or 7 years. So yeah, really excited to continue to support that moving ahead.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. All right, I think we'll go to question number 7. For the CEOs, any more that you want to say about how has your partnership with your providers worked over the years of the IPS pilots? Question number 7.
I would say that, I'm sorry, Shane, I'm jumping in first here. Maybe we should let Melissa go first.
I'm not on the panel. I'm just a viewer. So
okay, Russ.
No, it's been wonderful. I've appreciated Hope Haven has done some different calls and things like that to get, especially I think integrated health home and get everyone on the same page. So I've enjoyed that. Again, I can just speak for myself being new and getting all this underneath and really understanding it. They've been responsive and wonderful. And again, as we continue to look at how we're building our across our region to make sure that all of the services and things are equitable, looking at, of course, 43 North Iowa and what they're doing as well. So working on, excited to build new partnerships as well.
Thank you.
So I was going to say, I think Brenna might have been the one that brought up that when you have these meetings, the mental health provider normally is able to bill out when they meet with a client, but they can't bill out for these meetings. And so everybody else sitting at that table can bill out. The IHH can bill out, Oak Rehab's getting paid, the provider of supported employment is getting paid, but the mental health people are not. And so that, it has been a challenge. We've had people that have said, boy, I really want to be involved. And they have basically said, I'm going to schedule it over my noon hour, or I'm going to schedule it and not get paid for that hour, or whatever the case may be. So that is one of the things that we have experienced. It has been really nice that they have been willing to do that. I do hope that the state partners on the call, including Oak Rehab, DHS IME, and MCOs, that maybe we would have some consideration of how do we fund those folks for their time to make it more interactive and participatory on the part of the mental health providers.
Thank you. Shane.
Yeah, I want to thank Russell for reminding me and all of us that that the mental health centers are partners in this process, and I tend to fail to sing their praises, so I will do that now. They've been great in partnering with us to further this program. And that's really what it's about. You know, when we refer to partnership, that's exactly what this is. It's a partnership between the providers like Hope Haven and the mental health centers, CEOs and, DVR and all of the staff out there. And then unless we were actively working together as real partners, this thing wouldn't happen. Now, as in all partnerships, there's shared risk, and I appreciate that on everybody's part. But that's part of how you get business done, I think. So anyway, it's been a great experience and a real partnership. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
Great, thanks you guys. I think we'll go on to question 8. We're sticking with the CEOs here. Are there other things that you would like to share with other region CEOs about IPS? And I think we do have a number of, at least a few other region CEOs in the audience. So anything else you guys want to say?
I would just say that it's worth your investment. Even if you have to pay for startup for the first couple of years, it's worth your investment. When you look at what our charge is, we really are charged with providing services. And when we provide supported employment, I have said before, the intent of vocational services is that people would get a job. And I have really seen the effectiveness of this approach. It wasn't free. As Shane said, it would be nice to see it be able to be financially stable and fundable by other sources. But in the beginning, when we paid for it, we knew we were going to pay for it, and it worked. And we have people who receive jobs and they're still working. So if I could say anything to my peers, it would be that, go ahead and pony up for the first year or two. If you have to, give your providers some startup, partner with them, have communication. I think the nice thing about working with Sherry and Kelly is that we'd worked with them for years. And so we already knew them. They do a good job. They were North Iowa Vocational Center, so you knew by name they're going to work in vocational services, and they were just very easy to work with, and we had good communication. There wasn't a pointing the finger that they're trying to do something sneaky or we're trying to not pay or whatever. So I thought it went very well. So invest up front, and you'll get a return on your investment.
Thank you. Shane?
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Russell said it, and he said it very eloquently. But I would just want to reiterate the fact that it's been a great experience. It's incredibly worthwhile, and I would counsel all of the CEOs out there to consider investing in this.
Thank you.
All right, and question 9, I'm tempted to skip it, but do you have any other words that you want to say briefly about the funding?
Go ahead, Russ. Anything, Russell or Shane?
I think we've probably beat that horse to death. So.
Yep.
All right, so another chance to look at the chat pod here then and see if there are other questions that have come in throughout this segment.
Just kudos to Sue is the first one from Mary. And then Jan Heidemann asks, have you presented IPS to the CEO Collaborative?
Janet,
that is yes, and I actually represent the CEO Collaborative on the IPS work group, so they're aware of it. But Russell and I haven't tag teamed yet to force everybody to get involved.
Unfortunately, as I said earlier, the legislature keeps putting new things on us. Plus, we had this well, I don't know what you call it, pandemic. I don't know if you guys had heard that. So this kind of took up a little bit of our time and kind of redirected. And the governor did give, and it was very gracious, gave regions what $30 million that we need to spend by the end of the year. And this has become a real priority for us as well. We have some deadlines next July for some of our complex needs that have to be in place. So even though we've brought it up, I think that you can only do so much. But Jan, I do believe that if you're willing to take the lead on this and come work for Shane and Melissa and I, we could probably, you know, double what we paid you last year if you just come and do it for us.
Okay.
I think Jan's probably smiling, Russell. We have another question. As a provider working with persons with mental health disorders, would you recommend starting with SEP and then transitioning over to IPS if and when funding becomes available?
Anybody wants to take that one can raise their hand.
Amy, can you read the question again? I'm not sure I grasped it fully.
As a provider working with persons with mental health disorders, would you recommend starting with SEP and then transitioning over to IPS if and when funding becomes available?
Is
supported
SEP
employment?
Yeah,
supported
employment.
I believe, Denise, you mean supported employment program, right? Like a standard supported employment program? Yeah.
Okay. Nobody? Rachel. Oh, and then Vienna. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would, for sure, if IPS isn't available, you know, work with somebody with your supported employment program. I mean, you can still obviously work to move towards job development quickly if that's what the person wants. You know, I think the state team is going to talk more about how IPS might be delivered or how it might be available and how the rollout might happen throughout the rest of the state. So I don't know what time frame that would be, but I would say definitely, that's just my opinion. Obviously, if somebody wants to work, let's use what resources we have to try to get them a job.
Vienna.
I kind of concur with what Rachel just said. I mean, if there's no IPS in your area, obviously, go seek out support employment services through our traditional supported employment programs. But, again, with what I want to kind of emphasize is that when you're working with somebody with mental health needs, you're going to want to take a look at the whole resources and supports that person is in need of. And I don't know if there's situations where IPS might not be the route for that person, or if IPS would be the better route for that person. But we got to remember that even with IPS or support employment, the idea is to begin working with that person as soon as they are ready. And if IPS isn't available, at least give them support employment services, and we can begin working with them there. Because the whole idea about this model is begin working when the person is ready for employment, and when that person is ready to begin working right away. So.
Thank you. Rachel, do you have more to say?
No, that I didn't unraise my hand, but I just,
okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
All right. Do we have any more in the chat pod, or is that it for now?
That's it.
Okay, very good. Let's go to question 10 for the state partners. Next. Okay, what are some of the issues that you've been working on to try and move Iowa's system forward to support IPS? And if my partners would indulge me, I'd go first and take a stab at answering this. So there's really three big issues for us to bring IPS up to scale in Iowa. And the first one was funding the services through VR and through Medicaid. And the next slide, if you want to jump to it, shows the model that VR and Medicaid have come up with basically for the outcome payments. And this is currently in use for the pilots, obviously only the pilots because they're the only ones that are doing IPS in Iowa right now. The second issue would be defining a methodology or a criteria for sanctioning or approving, if you would, new IPS teams for startup and qualifying them for IPS services funding. And then the third one would be how to fund the team building steps and the professional training, technical assistance, and the fidelity reviews. So those are, in my mind, the three issues that we're working on. You can go back to the last slide if you want, unless Leanne and Vienna want to talk a little bit about this model.
Hi, it's Vienna. I can talk about that model a little bit, but I also wanted to also add to Lynn's list of things to kind of consider. I'd like to add that we also should be mindful of the benefits that some folks are getting through mental health services and their IHH also, because that's something that some of the people who are going through IPS want to consider, and that's really a lot to do with their benefits planning. And that's going to be a major issue that I think we as a state as a whole need to figure out. As far as the funding model, this is a model that we collaborated with both Hope Haven and Hope Haven Rock Valley, and I keep wanting to call you guys NIFIC. I might be dating myself. What is it? 43 North. I'm sorry. Yes, 43 North Iowa. And so with IME and the two CRPs and VR, we took a look at the way things were done through IPS, and we were also very fortunate that we had our superstar Sue Faber in our 43 North Iowa area, who really helped us understand how she was able to be successful and kind of use that to model for the rest of our other areas, and worked out, when the first payments could be done, and the second and third and the fourth and so forth, and why some of the transition periods. So when they get out of, career exploration and into actual job development, those types of transition periods, we were able to kind of make that fit into that RSA process that we were talking about. And I know, and I won't say too much about IME. I think hopefully Leanne is in the call and she can talk more about that. But I think for them, it was more of how to fit it with their service codes as well. And so when we were able to kind of see where those transitioning happened, it made it a little bit easier for us to be able to define, those celebratory moments, and we call it milestones, right? But these are really achievable moments that we could not only, deliver it in the payments, but also deliver it in recognizing with the at VR, we call them job candidates, but to recognize it with our job candidates that they're progressing and getting to that employment phase. And also towards the ending of it, when it talks about the 90-day successful job retention outcome, at VR, that becomes a critical moment for us, because we want to make sure that when we exit out of the picture, the long-term supports that looks in the form of ongoing therapy, and if the person requires a long-term job coach for their successful picture, we want to make sure that is in place. And so, even though if they're 90 days successful in their employment placement, we don't exit out of that picture until we know that those processes are followed.
Yeah, and I can just talk a little bit about the Medicaid funding model. So, and maybe we'll talk about this in the panel about where we're at in trying to adopt the administrative rule, or draft administrative rules, adopt those. Maybe we hold off on that until we get to that part of the questioning. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so are we ready for question 11 then?
I think so.
Here we
Okay.
are.
So what comes next in the process, and when can Iowans expect the work to be completed? Again, in my mind, what comes next is answering two of the issues that I mentioned to the last question, is defining the criteria by which we stand up teams, or that we accredit teams, IPS teams, or new locations and teams. What would be the expectations for that to be sanctioned and given the go-ahead? And then also, obviously, along with that would be the go-ahead to receive the services funding. And then the other issue would be answering the question of who's going to fund the TA, the training, and the fidelity reviews, and how's that going to work? How's that going to happen? We know what the inputs are to that. We don't know what the answers are. We know it takes about, if you were going to stand up one team standalone, it takes about probably $25,000. If a group collaborated to stand up a couple of teams at a time, and you could maximize the trainer and the TA consultant time and train a couple of teams at once, you can bring that cost down to about 16 or 17,000 per team. But again, other than what the pilot regions have done, nobody's trying to knock our door down to say, here, take this money. So we have to figure out where's that going to come from and how's that going to work.
You muted. Were you handing off to me?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay. So we have a work group right now that has been working on the habilitation program. We are redesigning the needs-based eligibility criteria for habilitation. We part of that process was identifying a new assessment in order to make those needs-based eligibility determinations, as well as to make service authorization decisions around the home-based HAB service. As part of our work on the administrative rules and the state plan amendment for those changes, we are also implementing, or I should say, putting in the requirements around IPS. So Chapter 77, we're making the addition of the provider qualifications for providing IPS under the Iowa Medicaid program. And so that would, of course, include the fidelity reviews, participating in the national technical assistance, part of that National Learning Collaborative that is hosted by Westat, I believe, and maintaining fidelity. And so we're building in the provider criteria. And then for Chapter 78, we are defining the service and each of the milestone or outcome payments related to those outcomes that are achieved for each person that you saw on that fee schedule that Lynn showed you earlier. And we will be assigning a specific procedure code, a standalone procedure code for each of those outcomes under IPS. Right now, you can see that we're paying for each of them using our traditional funding model, but we want to assign IPS its own procedure code and modifier combinations so that when we do roll this out as a habilitation service, that it's standalone, we can identify it within the claims data. So with that in mind, the work group keeps working on the rules and the state plan amendment. It looks like we'll probably be targeting a no earlier than April 1st because there's so much work that still needs to be done. You know, rules will have to be noticed, SPA will have to be noticed, CMS will have to approve. The Human Services Council will also have to approve of the rules. And so probably no earlier than April 1st, but no later than July 1st of 2021 for rule adoption. So essentially, if there was a provider that was to come on board to, you know, had funding for the fidelity reviews, technical assistance and all that, and wanted to start delivering IPS under Medicaid, we would do that through an exception to policy, just like we have the 2 pilot programs until the rules are implemented. Once the rules are implemented, a provider would have to apply to Medicaid. An existing provider would need to contact provider services and indicate that they wanted to add that service line to their approved services for Medicaid, and would have to demonstrate that they are participating in IPS, they're going through fidelity reviews, they have baseline, those types of things. So we're hammering all that out right now and keep working on that. So that's kind of the timeline that I'm dealing with as far as adoption of rules and the state plan amendment that goes along with HAB program. Again, like Lynn said, the costs of the training and technical assistance, the cost of the fidelity reviews, that all lives outside of the direct service reimbursement rate for IPS. So we still need to identify how the state is going to fund the fidelity reviews and the training and technical assistance for these providers. We have a lot of ideas around that, where that money could come from, various sources, you know, partnership with our MCOs, our mental health blocks, you know, services block grant. Could it come through Ticket to Work funding, through Iowa Workforce Development? You know, there's just options available that we're still trying to hammer out. Leadership is aware of this. We've been able to present leadership with the funding model for this service, and to get that, grease those wheels on getting them to think about how these services could be funded going forward. And I think that you know, there's a great benefit to Medicaid of providing this services, because we know, you know, when people are working, costs Medicaid, you know, less in claims paid over periods of time. And so it's not only a benefit to Medicaid, it's also a benefit to the MCOs to help fund those, you know, fidelity and technical assistance, so we can get more teams on board and really, you know, embrace the IPS model here in Iowa.
Thank you, Leanne. We had Russ with his hand raised.
Sorry, my keyboard doesn't work anymore. I guess I'm just gonna, Leanne, just for clarification. So if we have a provider out there and they want to provide IPS and the region they're in is willing to pay for the technical assistance to start up, do they reach out to provider services? Who would they reach out to say, hey, we want to move forward on this?
They'd reach out to me because right now it'd be done through an exception to policy. They would have to be an enrolled supported employment provider right now. And then once the rules are implemented, then it would go through the typical enrollment, add-on process with provider services. But for now, it'll come through the ETP route since we don't have it in an administrative rule yet.
All right. All right, I'm gonna cut you guys off because we have just a couple of minutes left here, and I want to know if there's any questions in the chat pod from the audience. Yeah,
Misty shared, she just wanted to support with Vienna's comment about benefits planning. She said it's critical to include a benefits planning piece into the strategies for persons who receive Social Security Disability Insurance or SSDI benefits or SSI and want to work, not just for mental health services, but housing, food assistance, and the like.
Totally agree with that. Yeah,
Thank you,
that's
Misty.
been one of the issues that that has been a little bit sticky to try and unravel and address in this process as well. Any other questions or comments there?
Nope, not at this time.
Otherwise, I would just say I want to thank all the panelists for your participation today. Thank you, everybody that attended this webinar. We're excited about IPS, and we really are working diligently to try and resolve the unresolved issues. Hopefully, in the near-term future, so that we can see more of it operating in Iowa. It's been one of the most successful employment services that's out there, and it really has an impact on people's lives. Our pilot providers have some amazing success stories. If you want to ask them offline or off to the side, they have some wonderful stories to share with you, how people's lives have been totally transformed. We know that when people go to work and stay work successfully, it has an impact all throughout their whole life. And so for anybody that has a desire to work, this is what we want for them. Okay, we hope to resume our regularly scheduled series with Teresa Brandenburg, possibly in the near future. The Department of Labor had some glitches to work out, so we don't have access to that subject matter expert at this point in time. But when we do get access to her again, we will resume the rest of the webinars that were planned to get information out about IPS. And I believe her next one would be on the fidelity review process. Obviously, our schedule or our calendar has gotten messed with a little bit, so we may need to figure out a new schedule for those. There are, I think, 3 webinars that Teresa planned to do for Iowa yet to come this year. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Mm-hmm. All right.